Hi everyone, if you like what I do, then be sure to hit that subscribe button and consider checking out my Patreon. Enjoy the video. Pulled against their will into a world of hardship and death, individuals from all walks of life are forced to survive in a hostile land reigned over by a mysterious megalomaniac, able to change the environment to suit his own whims. The one to sit upon the throne of this world is hardly a leader though, and is rather a prisoner in their own right to something much more insidious. But a time may come when one in league with those shadowy watchers will take the throne willingly, risking every soul who resides within this strange place, and threatening to reignite a pan-dimensional conflict between two unfathomable powers. Beyond an existence shackled by the trivial concepts of space and time, reside transcendental beings of incomprehensible power and intellect. For whole eternities they remain unknown and unfettered by realities beyond their own, but in time their isolation would be shattered by the touch of eldritch entities wishing to spread their all-consuming darkness. An eons-long struggle ensued between the entities of light and shadow, before the darkness was eventually forced back into the void between realities. Even now the gestalt creatures of light had not prevailed, for the creeping hand of darkness reached still, and drastic action must be taken to contain it. To close the rift from which the shadows stretched, a realm was forged within the void, a constant seal to forever stem the flow of nightmares. Retreating back to their own reality, the entities of light left behind a part of themselves, a body that would become a moon of the constant, containing avatars of their true forms to watch over the rift, ensuring it would never open again. Over the course of its existence, life developed in the constant, plants and birds and animals, and soon one of those life forms, an odd, almost shrimp-like creature, developed sapience. They gathered into tribes, tilled the land for crops, and dug minerals out of the ground to build their society. It was to be these mining operations that would lead them to make a startling discovery though. Life in the constant was not easy, and really for a world hanging in the infinite nothing, it should have been impossible. But as the fledgling peoples of the constant dug deeper into the ground, they uncovered whispers of power from far below, a power that they could use to fuel their civilization. Following the whisper far into the core of the constant, they found a dimensional crack which leaked the powerful substance they had followed from the surface. The shrimp creatures used this fuel to construct a great city around the rift, and used it to shape their civilization. Under the watch of the society's twin heralds, a gateway was constructed in order to force the rift open so that more of the fuel could be collected. But when it came time to activate the device, streams of brilliant white energy poured towards the gateway as the creatures of the moon tried to stop the portal from opening and unleashing the nightmare shades once more. Although at first seeming like they had succeeded in their attempt, the rift had been wedged open enough for the power of the shadow entities to spill out. Seeing only the benefit it held for their people, one of the heralds used the increased flow of fuel without limit to propagate crops, create novel machines, and bring an unheard of prosperity to their civilization. In time, it was even discovered that the fuel could be used to reanimate the dead and transform the living. Through experiments with the fuel that many would call unnatural, entities such as the Ancient Guardian and Fuel Weaver were born to watch over the gateway. But the more the fuel was used, the wider the portal was forced open, and while the population celebrated their newfound fortune, the other heralds grew concerned over the fuel's use. Even though their fears were disregarded, the danger they had seen in the gateway would soon come to pass, as the portal grew ever wider until it tore open the rift, allowing the power of the shades to flow out unimpeded. The people of the great civilization quickly began to fall foul to the torrents of nightmare fuel flooding into the constant. Those it did not outright kill were transformed into horrifying abominations, subservient to the will on the other side of the portal. In a last-ditch effort to close the rift, the lunar beings bestowed the power of light upon the second herald, who fought back the darkness and went on to destroy the gateway, closing the rift and giving their own life in the process. The shadow had already spread too far though, consumed too much of the world already, and left alone in their crumbling civilization, the remaining herald laid down their power, only now realizing how much they had been corrupted by it. As it reduced the constant to nothing but ash, the shadow tried to coerce the herald to use its power to reopen the gateway. Having seen the error of their ways, the herald knew exactly what awaited them if they did not cooperate, but refused nonetheless, and was, as a result, removed from the throne. Despite the damage inflicted upon the constant, the rift was sealed, and the darkness was isolated, unable to threaten the beings of light, so the moon was content to merely observe, ready to intervene if a situation called for it. The nightmare creatures, however, would be much more proactive in their efforts. Now that the darkness had spread across the constant, the land was unstable, turning to ash wherever the shadows touched. They had the power to reverse the damage, but not the will. Their entire purpose was to consume and turn everything to shadow, and if they were ever going to reopen the gateway, then they would need someone to channel their power through and stabilize the constant. Beginning their search for another to sit upon their throne of nightmares, the shadow creatures managed to disperse a portion of their power through dimensional cracks into nearby realities, manifesting itself in a variety of ways across the Omniverse, but in the realm of Earth, it took the form of a book known as the Codex Umbra. The book would eventually fall into the hands of a William Carter, who studied the tomes and used the cursed knowledge it contained to transform himself into the magician Maxwell. Upon overusing the book in his performances, Maxwell and his assistant Charlie were pulled into the constant, where they found vast plains of ash, containing only ruins, a spattering of strange creatures, and the shadows. He had already accepted the power of the shadows when he utilized it in his old life, so he alone was placed upon the throne and commanded that he reform and maintain the world so another may enter and open the gateway. Without any choice in his actions, and believing Charlie had been killed, Maxwell did as he was commanded, and rebuilt the constant as he had envisioned. Knowing the activation of this gateway could only hold disaster, he made the land terrifying and dangerous, so much so that no one could possibly survive it for any length of time. He also managed to fracture the realm, making it so that it was impossible for the survivors he would eventually bring here to team up. His efforts were cruel and would lead to torturous existences for everyone he was forced to abduct, but ultimately it would be for the greater good. Maxwell would remain tied to the Nightmare Throne for what seemed like an eternity, not believing anyone he tricked into the constant would be so kind as to free him, and yet he was eventually granted his freedom by one of the survivors. It was a bittersweet moment though, for upon being released, Maxwell crumbled to bones, only to be reborn as a survivor himself, while his saviour was forced to replace him, the shadow creatures always needing the throne to be inhabited in order to maintain the constant. While time is not exactly a clear aspect in the constant, in the scheme of events, Maxwell's saviour would not need to sit upon the throne for long, as others would find them and usurp the throne for themselves, each time perpetuating a cycle of freedom and enslavement that would only end when an unlikely individual voluntarily chose to take the throne for themselves. While Maxwell did not know what had truly happened to his assistant, and believed her to be dead, her true fate may have been much worse. When Maxwell was placed upon the Nightmare Throne, Charlie was taken and experimented on by the shadow creatures. They knew Maxwell may act to hinder their plans, and so took the opportunity to prepare a replacement for him in the form of a mortal merged with a shadow creature. This would mean they no longer needed to relay commands through an independent mind, and could simply change the world as they pleased. There was no guarantee the experiments would work though, and in the end Charlie was left with two feuding personalities within her body, that of her original self and the shadow creature that had infested her. It was not until she made her move to take the Nightmare Throne that the dual personalities reconciled, and the shadow creature's experiment proved to be a success. So much of a success was it that Charlie was able to project herself into every corner of the constant, lurking in the shadows and able to harm anyone who ventured into the darkness. Soon after Charlie declared herself Queen of the Constant, Maxwell found that he was occupying the same realm as Winston, one of the first survivors he had pulled into the Constant, and after coming to terms with the fact they would need to work together in order to survive, they decided to construct a jerry-rigged portal so that they may unite with other survivors on their own terms, rather than that of the shadow creatures. But Charlie had been watching, and destroyed the portal, replacing it with her own Floyd postern. Now having made a way for the survivors to work together, Charlie compelled them to seek out the ruins of the ancient civilization that had wrought so much calamity, and reactivate their broken gateway so the nightmares could once more spill forth unhindered. She promised that the gateway could lead them a great many places, including back to Earthrealm. So without any other options, the survivors uncovered the gateway deep beneath the surface and activated it. While the portal did indeed take them to other places, none took them home, and all the time more and more shadow entities crossed over, amassing a force large enough to face the lunar beings. Seeing the gateway active again and the growing threat below, the Watchers on the Moon decided they must take action, and broke away part of their celestial construct, throwing it to the Constant as a staging ground for what was to come. Here on this lunar island, they would gather their strength, and attempted to enlighten any of the survivors who ventured there to the true nature of things. While they were not yet able to fully comprehend the truth, the enlightened entities were confident they would eventually be able to, and at that time, they would venture forth into the ruins one last time, pushing back the darkness as they went, and reseal the gateway once and for all. Where their first conflict had once raged in the abstract voids of an unknowable reality, their final one would take place in the constant itself, with lowly mortals from another existence leading the charge. Hi everyone, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked what you saw, then please consider liking the video, subscribing and sharing it with your friends. If you want to support the channel even more, then head over to Patreon, become a channel member or buy some merch. Links are all down in the description. I hope you all have a great day and I'll see you next time.